This video has been brought to you by the generous channel members and lads over at Patreon. Thank you all for supporting me and my content. Being an individual who has actively engaged in discussing political and historical discourse long before my YouTube era, I have had the opportunity to encounter and engage in conversations with numerous individuals who align themselves with a diverse range of political ideologies. In the process, I have come across intriguing and varied interpretations of historical events and conflicts that have piqued my curiosity and enriched my understanding of the world around us. Since I identify myself as right-wing, I have obviously had many clashes with those that identify as left-wing and progressive. And if you have ever engaged with these people as much as I have, you would have more than likely been called the infamous F-word by them: fascist. This strategy by the left to label everyone on the right as a fascist and Nazi is not uncommon. Actually, it is extremely prevalent among these people, and many famous left-wing content creators on YouTube do love using the F-word a lot when discussing their opponents. And the further left you go, towards the more radical sides like communism, you will see that their followers are even more trigger-happy with that term. I myself have seen so many communists unironically calling social democrats and even liberals as fascists, or simply fascists in disguise. Of course, anyone who is even a little bit mature in political discourse can see how ludicrous it is to go around and label everyone who disagrees with you a fascist. But despite it being so obvious, the question comes up: why exactly is this strategy so popular? What exactly makes it so effective, and why is the left so keen on preserving it? These are the questions I hope to answer today. Why does the left love calling everyone on the right fascist so much? And the answer to this may not be as straightforward as one may think. Every human being on planet Earth has their own opinions and is entitled to them. And more importantly, humans should have the right to talk about their opinions openly. And this is the beauty of freedom of speech. You have the full right to express your opinions and try to convince people why your opinion is correct. The upside of freedom of speech is not only that people can say what they want without consequences, but also that it will lead to certain ideas being understood more. Let's say, for example, you have your own show where you push a certain narrative and idea, like that all French people eat frogs, and you make several points about your narrative and back it up with evidence, and then someone else comes along on another show and challenges your idea, saying how French people don't eat frogs, and that person brings their own evidence. And then you, the listener of both shows, come to your own conclusion after hearing both sides of the argument. Do French people eat frogs or do they not? That is up for you to decide. And for the sake of argument, let's say you adopt the idea that French people don't eat frogs, and then you start developing your own ideas and arguments, even perhaps coming across new evidence that proves your point. And then you start spreading your thoughts around, and thus you are contributing to this discussion. And the same thing can be applied to people who do believe French people eat frogs. But one thing is for certain, you will in the end understand the topic better. By going back and forth with debates, discussions, writing books, those involved with this topic will tend to understand it more by listening to both sides of the argument, and while it can sometimes convince people to switch sides, sometimes it can even lead to people finding flaws and pointing them out. With every point a new argument brought up, it opens the possibility for the opposing side to make a response to it and come up with their own argument against it, or at least that's how it should be working. Because now, let's go back to my example. You have a show where you push the narrative that French people eat frogs, but suddenly there is no other side to the argument. It either does not exist or the one who is making it is so irrelevant and is not allowed to push it to the broader public like you are. Yeah, that is where the problem starts. With there practically being no real other side to the argument, people will generally only hear that one side of it and nothing else. However, with this addition of there not being any real opposition to the idea, people can start manipulating it by spreading outright lies and saying that the other side believes in things they actually don't. But since there is no real or open opposition about it from the other side, this narrative will get accepted. And we have seen this plenty of times in totalitarian systems throughout history, censoring and banning the thoughts and ideas of anything they deem to oppose their own narrative, and making sure that the people do not learn about them, but rather just focus on their own ideologies. But then there are times where the idea isn't directly banned, but it is heavily suppressed. And I could not give a better example of this than the infamous Red Scare in the United States. The Red Scare, also sometimes called McCarthyism after US Senator Joseph McCarthy, who was spearheading this idea, advocated the idea that communism was an evil force that had infiltrated the United States, how communism was going to ruin America and kill everyone, how being communist was anti-American, and so on. Classic propaganda tactics. Now, despite myself being anti-communist, I have to admit that the Red Scare really did nothing positively. Worst of all, the term communist in the US at the time was more used as a slander tool than an actual identification of someone belonging to the communist ideology. US politicians would very commonly label critics, journalists, and anyone else a communist, and considering the reputation communism had, it had the possibility of ruining someone's career. If you would ask a normal American teenager around that time period about communism, they would always say that communism is bad, communism is evil, but how many of them would actually give you a proper definition on what communism actually was or why it was evil? Truth be told, the vast majority of Americans, despite knowing and seeing communism as bad, they could never properly identify or define it, because the Red Scare made sure to be as vague about communism as possible, and as said, completely made stuff up with just a little bit of truth sprinkled in there. The Communist Party of the United States, however, was not banned and they were still accepting memberships, but due to the political climate, they were barred from entering anything mainstream or even giving them a platform to speak from. Despite their technically being in opposition, they had practically no voice, being suppressed at every turn, and Americans were being told to stay away from them and not fall for their communist lies. Obviously today in America, the Red Scare is over. People are more quote-unquote informed about communism than ever, and so it managed to relatively die down. But this is what I was talking about. Because there was practically no opposition from actual communists in the United States and abroad, Senator McCarthy and other US politicians changed the meaning of what it meant to be a communist at their own will. And since their voice was the dominant and only one, people were buying into everything they said and believed it. By being the only voice without opposition, one could define communism as really whatever they wanted. So why am I exactly talking about this? What is my point? Well, if you take everything about the Red Scare / McCarthyism and change the word communism into fascism, you will start noticing how things are getting a little too similar. It's almost like the left adopted the ideas of McCarthyism and made their own version of it by directing it towards the right. Now, am I trying to defend fascism with this? Of course not. Being a monarchist, I have my fair share of disagreements and criticisms of fascist doctrine, but this is no real way to learn about ideologies. If you want to learn about fascism and what fascists actually believe in, then go pick up a book from fascist thinkers and start reading and making your own conclusions, and then apply your own worldview to it and criticize it. But that is exactly the issue. The left isn't even properly criticizing fascist thought. When they say they are criticizing fascism, what they truly mean is they don't like Trump or any group that is just a bit to the right of the Mensheviks. I have yet to see, for example, any kind of leftist breaking down Giovanni Gentile's essays on fascism and go over each chapter, properly understanding what he is trying to say and properly applying criticism to it. But obviously that is too much work. My point is, by taking the term fascist, the left is able to twist and change the meaning of fascism to whatever they want, thanks to the fact that the opposition doesn't even exist or is never heard. and the average Joe will most likely never even question it. They themselves don't even know or can properly define what fascism is, and in true Red Scare fashion, instead use it as a giant slander tool to bring down their opponents without engaging in an actual debate. But what exactly makes this approach so effective? We'll get back to the video in just a second. Let's hear from today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. For those who are not aware, a VPN or virtual private network will encrypt all your internet traffic through a digital tunnel, but most importantly, it will mask your IP address and other sensitive information from hackers, government, and so forth. Atlas is currently one of the cheapest VPNs on the entire market, only $183 per month for a 3-year plan, with 3 extra months for free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you shouldn't wait. Check out the link in the description, get atlas.com/Lavader, and protect yourself. Protection is not the only benefit of a VPN. By changing your location while being encrypted, you can for example watch shows and movies on Netflix that are not available in your country, and this comes in handy for me because I use a VPN for research purposes, since Germany is well known for censoring certain videos, articles, and information in general. Again, that is not all. Atlas can find you the best deals when shopping online, or even when you are booking a flight or hotel. You can enjoy fast speeds while browsing and gaming, and it protects unlimited devices with just a single subscription. Again, Atlas is currently running a huge discount with 3 years for only $183 per month plus 3 months for free. Time is running out, so get the deal with the link in the description before it runs out. Huge thanks to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. If we look at the state of politics in the vast majority of countries, specifically the West, we will see that fascism is practically a dead ideology. When I say that, I don't mean that they do not exist. There are still many organizations and groups that identify as fascist, and undoubtedly there are many people who believe in it. But what I mean is that fascism has no actual political power and has barely, if any, influence in any government of a developed nation. This has not, however, stopped leftists from calling many mainstream right-wing parties and figures as fascist, like Donald Trump and the Republican Party, the AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen, and the list goes on. Think of pretty much any public right-wing figure, and I can tell you that they had definitely been called fascists once or twice. Since the definition of fascism has been completely distorted to be nothing more than a slander term, it's very easy to label them all as fascists the moment there is even a shred of quote-unquote similarity between them, like for example, standing on a balcony. The reason why this strategy is so effective is because it plays with the anxieties of people, saying how there is a hidden enemy among them, and how fascism is about to jump out at any second and take over. Everyone knows that fascism is bad, and when you start saying that Trump is a fascist, they will start thinking that Trump is gonna do something on the scale of Adolf Hitler. I would say there are 5 big reasons why this strategy of an unseen enemy lurking in the shadows is efficient to fool people. Number 1. Primal fear and survival instincts. Humans have evolved to be highly sensitive to threats, especially those that are not easily identifiable or tangible. This primal fear and survival instinct can be easily triggered by the idea of an unseen enemy lurking among the population. In this case, the notion of fascists lurking among us tapped into this instinctual fear, making people more susceptible to accept the idea without demanding concrete evidence. Number 2. Confirmation bias and groupthink. Once fears are stoked, people tend to interpret ambiguous information in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. This is known as confirmation bias. In this context, those who were already predisposed to believing in the existence of fascists in the government were more likely to interpret any suspicious behavior or association as evidence. Additionally, the fear-driven environment encouraged groupthink, where individuals were more inclined to adopt the prevailing beliefs of the larger society, reinforcing their idea further. Number 3. Cognitive dissonance and simplification. This has created a cognitive dissonance, a state of psychological discomfort arising from holding contradictory beliefs or ideas. To alleviate this discomfort, people might simplify complex situations and accept black and white explanations, such as the notion that anyone with right-wing or nationalist views must be a fascist. Simplification allowed people to make sense of a complex world and reinforce the beliefs in the widespread presence of fascism today. Number 4. Influence of authority figures. Political leaders and other authority figures can play a crucial role in shaping public opinion around these issues, whether it be a prominent YouTuber, real-life activist, politician, or organization. When such claims come from authoritative sources, people may be more inclined to accept them without questioning, especially if doing so aligns with their existing fears and biases. And finally, number 5. Social and peer pressure. The fear of being labeled as a fascist sympathizer or soft on fascism can contribute to social pressure to conform. People may be afraid of these consequences of being seen as insufficiently committed to the cause of rooting out fascism, which leads them to buy into this narrative to demonstrate their loyalty and avoid suspicion. For example, in Austria, just being under suspicion of having Nazi sympathies can lead to your life getting ruined and fired from your job, and a normal man obviously does not want to risk that. In my personal opinion, I believe the 5th reason, social and peer pressure, is the biggest reason why people are adopting this narrative. With this, I would like to introduce you all to Solomon Asch, a psychologist who pioneered social psychology. During his lifetime, he had run a few interesting experiments called the Asch conformity experiments. This is how the experiments went. There would be 10 participants. One participant would be a genuine one, while the other 9 participants were fake ones, decoys intentionally planted for the sake of the experiment, and their task would be a very simple one. They were presented with 3 lines, and they all had to decide together on which line was the longest. Simple enough, right? But here is where it gets interesting. Those 9 fake participants would intentionally agree that, for example, line C is the longest instead of the obvious line B. And Asch would discover that the one genuine participant would agree with the group 40 to 50% of the time, despite it being plainly obvious that the other line was the longest one. Up to 75% of participants conformed to an obvious lie at least once. This is because of social pressure. If 9 people are telling you X is true and not Y, despite Y being very clearly the correct answer, people will cave to them and accept that X is true. Even Asch himself would point out how worrying the results were. Quote, "The fact that intelligent, well-meaning young people are willing to call white black is a matter of concern." How does this apply to our topic? If you are active in areas that have a very leftist leaning and people you interact with share these same values, you are expected to adopt this narrative as well in order to not seem like an outsider. And even if you might disagree with this notion in the beginning and just parrot it without actually meaning it, over time you will come to genuinely believe in it, because the environment around you demands it. You don't even know yourself what actually makes Trump a Nazi, but because everyone around you and in your social circle says it, you start believing it without question. And this isn't just limited to either being accepted, but also because of the fear of the possible repercussions of what might happen if they find out that you don't actually believe in these things. Let me give you a recent example of the drama that happened with Vicky in 1999. Well, the first one before the whole grooming allegations. Discord server chats were leaked where Vicky was seen saying some unfavorable things towards Palestinians and supposedly standing in support of Israel. And then this basically started a whole public lynching of Vicky because people thought that she supported Israel instead of Palestine. It works like a hive mind. The moment you have your own opinions on a matter, like for example saying that not all right-wingers are fascists, you can expect that all the ties and reputation you built up can be ruined in an instant because of it, and no wonder that people can be fearful of saying what they truly think, and just continue parroting the same narrative. Observing many prominent radical ideologies and political movements that have risen to power over the years, specifically in the 20th century, we will see that one of the central components and programs by these movements was the elimination of a boogeyman. Whether it was the Jews for the Nazis or the filthy capitalists for the communists, one narrative was always clear. We, the good guys who want to help you, versus them, the bad guys who want to hurt you. Undoubtedly, this us versus them narrative doesn't just exist within radical ideologies, even in normal right-wing and left-wing circles, and I don't think that is necessarily bad. The difference is that the further radical you go, whether right or left-wing, you will see that the solutions and what to do with these enemies become much more extreme, and their presence and influence is vastly more exaggerated. For propaganda reasons, it's extremely effective. While most political activists share their thoughts on how to improve the country, battle crime and so forth, they sell something that goes beyond all of that. That there is a group of people who are present and powerful and want to harm you. That they are the saviors the people can trust to break their chains and defeat this enemy. And this is exactly what a prominent organization is doing: ANTIFA. When ANTIFA was first established as a movement in the early 20th century, they had an actual understandable role to play. It was the age when fascism was on the rise in Europe, and the ideology has even started taking over entire countries. And obviously, ANTIFA was there to combat their rise and raise awareness about fascism. Their entire purpose, as the name suggests, was to take a stand and fight fascism. But today, as I have explained, with fascism being a relatively dead ideology with no significant political power whatsoever, what is the point of them being around in the first place? And that's exactly the point. A movement whose entire existence is centered around standing against something rather than for something will never make it in the long term. And in order to keep their whole gist up, they had to resort to pretending that fascism is still very much a threat, because what's a hero without a villain? That is why they resort to calling anything right-wing as fascist in order to give their organization a reason to still exist, pretending and saying that fascism is on the rise, and that fascists are everywhere. And leftists accepted ANTIFA with open arms because they are aware how much they can use them as a propaganda tool. And naturally, people going around and seeing graffiti like "Fascists out, kill Nazis," and generally seeing them marching in the street might make them start believing that fascism is still very much around. We can actually see this in modern communists, for example. Communists believe that capitalism is the ultimate enemy that should be destroyed, and fascism to them is nothing more than a branch, a tentacle of this great demon. And yet they keep using the term fascist and not capitalist. Because let's be honest, telling a random Jewish person that fascists are after you and your family is gonna sound much more threatening and serious than saying capitalists are after you. Having this boogeyman, that is fascism, and parading it around like it's coming to kill everyone is valuable to boost their numbers and have their members and believers in this fantasy land. Now more than ever, since ANTIFA and the radical left generally started getting more and more militant in the past few years, going on this witch hunt for an enemy that is no longer a legitimate threat. Using this approach by calling all their critics and anyone who identifies themselves on the right as fascists, leftists are able to slander them easily, and the tactic they are using is nothing new. While not as successful, they took the strategies and approach by Joseph McCarthy and the way he handled the Red Scare and applied it for their own benefit, just crossing out communism with fascism. Because there is almost non-existent opposition and pushback, they were able to manipulate the term fascism and shape it in any way they saw fit. Someone is against immigration? They're a fascist. They don't like leftist policies? Fascist, and so on. By intentionally keeping the definition as vague and simple as possible, they are able to apply it to almost anything, and their followers will accept it without question. By manipulating people's fears of fascism and the horrors that came with it, they are subconsciously convincing people around them and their circles that fascism is on the rise and that it is a genuine real threat to their lives. And these people, despite even themselves knowing that these things said are wrong, still cave in due to the social pressure and the surrounding that keeps telling them these things. And eventually they adopt it as their own without fully understanding why themselves. As I have hinted, this practice and approach isn't just limited to the left and fascism. The Red Scare is the best example of this happening to the opposite side. But objectively, these whole fascist shenanigans are the most prominent and influential in the West. Even if we say that the people advocating them are in the minority, they still have a very clear and loud voice that makes it seem like they are everywhere and much stronger, which undoubtedly leads to more people accepting their worldview. Even if for the vast majority of people this is nothing more than a stupid slander strategy, we have to understand that for the people advocating them, it is very much a truth that they accept, whether subconsciously or consciously. They live in this world where fascists are all around them at every corner, that they are about to take over and are gonna become a threat to them personally. And even if we don't see the world as black and white as they do, it's honestly quite sad to see how they are being influenced to think this way, just as if they were in a cult. There are genuinely people among them who would put their life on the line to say that Trump is a fascist. To me, this is honestly just a depressing way to view the world and your surroundings, through these black and white lenses, that there is only fascism and anti-fascism, and for these people, I can feel nothing but pity.